Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul. And this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome Peter A. Antonucci. It's fun to welcome a guest with whom I share so much in common. Peter is from New York. I'm from New York. Peter graduated from the University of Rochester in 1982. I graduated from the University of Rochester in 1980. Peter authored a trilogy about life on the ocean. I authored a trilogy about life on the ocean. Peter is rich. Well, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. By the way, Peter didn't have to tell me he is rich. That was easy to gather by the fact that he was an owner at The World, a privately owned super yacht occupied and managed by its residents. The World is comprised of 165 apartments, costing between $2 and $20 million, and a minimum of $10 million net worth is required to buy at The World. By the way, Peter owned 4 apartments. I have been fascinated with this burgeoning trend of passionate cruisers deciding to live at sea for 6 to 12 months per year. However, the creation of The World was way ahead of the current trend. The World has been sailing exotic itineraries to bucket list destinations in every corner of the world since 2002. I'll certainly be asking Peter what led him to The World, but unfortunately, time won't allow me to spend the entire interview on that. You see, Peter is one of those multifaceted individuals for whom we can spend an entire interview on one of several aspects of his life. For instance, his best-selling trilogy, Billionaires at Sea, comprised of Billionaires Paradise, Ecstasy at Sea, Scandal at Sea, Billionaires in the Deep, and the just-published Tides of Betrayal, Scandal in the Waves, or his time as an esteemed commercial litigator in the New York City offices of 2 of the largest law firms in the world. So successful was Peter that he was able to retire at 52. Or Peter's experiences as a globetrotter. He has visited over 100 countries, traveled to Antarctica 3 consecutive years, a Guinness Book of World Records entrant, having been a part owner and passenger of a vessel that traveled to the southernmost point ever reached by a vessel, surpassing the previous record set by Amundsen, Shackleton, Ross, Scott, and Hillary. Familiar names who are Peter's heroes of Antarctic exploration. We'll somehow get Peter to talk about all of that, but such an esteemed guest always has an invitation to come back to the show, so we'll get to some things later that we don't get to today. Welcome, Peter, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Good morning, Paul, and thanks for having me on.
So how you doing?
Good. Getting ready for holidays, Christmas, New Year's, all this stuff coming up. Fun time of year.
Yeah. My wife was downstairs cooking, and I know that as soon as I'm done, she's going to put me to work. So let's talk as long as we can.
Okay, you got it.
So in the intro, I shared with listeners your accomplished and multifaceted life, and talked about how we have almost everything in common. Fill in some holes for us. Where you're from, where do you live, professional background, family, anything you would like to share.
Sure. Well, like you said, I am from New York. I was born and raised in Manhattan, lived in the same house for 52 years. I was born there, and I retired and I was still there. So, and I raised my kids there.
Wow.
So I was raised in the city. My kids were both raised. I have 2 kids who are now ages 33 and 30, both raised in the city. Then, like you, I followed your footsteps and went off to the University of Rochester
The frozen tundra.
That's what it is. That's what it was. It sure. And I think we were both there for some of the coldest winters.
Yeah, when I was there, they had two storms that are still memorable. One was, I don't know if you were there yet. One was 27 inches, and one was only 17 inches. But it started at the peak of the rush hour. I remember I left my house at 4:30 to pick up my wife, and I finally got to her at 11:30 that night.
Wow. No, I remember, I think it was 77 and 78 were the two big blizzards. And from then on, I knew I was going to spend my life on a ship because I didn't want to be in that snow anymore. But then I went off to law school and practiced law for 25 years in New York, mostly international, but I was a litigator. Primarily all defense, primarily class actions, consumer fraud, things like that. Represented any company that could hurt you or kill you was one of my clients. So I did that, and then decided I had enough of New York and had enough of work. At 52 years old, I decided to check out and take to the seas.
Let me ask you, before you decided to take to the seas, had you cruised?
Yes, not a lot. I'd been on a couple of I was on one Norwegian ship and two celebrity ships.
So how old were you when you had your first cruise?
Oh boy, 40, 42, something like that.
Okay. Were you hooked immediately, or did it have to kind of grow on you?
I really enjoyed it. The first one I went on was a family reunion. It was my aunt and uncle's, I think, 50th wedding anniversary, and all my cousins were there and my kids, and that was great fun. So the focus was more on the family and the fun, and whenever focus is on the family, it's usually a good time.
Sure.
Then I went on a couple of other ones, shorties, New York down to Bermuda or down to the islands, and then one around the Med and to Turkey, and that was great fun. And that was it. So I liked the idea of cruising. I had reservations about it on occasion, but I liked it, and I can't tell you that's why I got into the world, but there's certainly a nexus there.
Before we talk about the world, let's talk about your series, Billionaires at Sea, only because, I have a feeling, I know for a fact that Billionaires at Sea was inspired by your time at the World. So let's talk about Billionaires at Sea first, and then we'll talk about the World.
Sure.
So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us in the midst of your launch of the newest book in your Billionaires at Sea series, which is called Tides of Betrayal. But before we get to the new release, why did you write Billionaires at Sea?
Well, I'll make a long story short, Paul. When I was on the ship, when I was a litigator, I wrote a lot. Contrary to what people think, it's not all Perry Mason in courtrooms. A lot of it's briefs. And when I retired, I still had a writing habit that I couldn't break. And when I was on the World, I kept a diary, and the diary ended up being about 2,200 pages over 7 or 8 years. And then I left the ship and I wanted to write. And what did I really know about more than anything else? Well, I guess it was life at sea. I mean, I was inspired by the people I'd been with, the places I went, the things I saw. And every time something unusual happened, I was kind of tickled about, wow, this would be a great idea for a novel. And I finally had the time to sit down and write what I thought would be a novel. It turned out to be 3 novels, and that's how I got there.
Are people from, your co-passengers or co-owners from the World, are they in your novels?
Well, as I said, I was a lawyer for a lot of years. So the lawyer in me is going to say that this is, my books are pure work of fiction. The names of all the characters, places, all that stuff is absolutely fictitious, and any resemblance to people, places, or things, living or dead, is purely a creation of the author's mind. Blah blah blah.
Sounds
of course.
That sounds very loyally.
Yeah, of course it was inspired by my travels on the ship. That's how I learned to write about ships.
So what did the people on the World think about, when you came out with your first book, what was the reaction of your co-passengers?
That's a great question, Paul. It's one I get a lot. So when the first book was coming out, and I was on the board of directors on the ship, so I was privy to a lot of kind of all the details, the secrets, while the bodies are buried, all the stuff that only a board would know. And people were afraid I would disclose those things and disclose personal things about them. So there was a lot of concern, sometimes almost anger or animus about what was going to come out. And boy, I don't want to be in your book. I don't want to be in your book. The book came out and everybody kept saying, how come I'm not in your book? What do you mean?
That's a little bit like my first book was a memoir. I had a pretty major life event when I was 29 years old, because you're probably wondering, well, what made you write a memoir? But anyway, I changed names. It was all true, obviously. I changed names of everyone except my immediate family. But I had a similar reaction. I had a couple of people, including someone in my immediate family, who, kind of wished that I had talked more about them. But anyway, there's 3 books. Are the books sequential, or could listeners pick up the newest release? I think it came out, December 1st? Something like that?
Yes.
Could people pick up the new release and start enjoying it if they haven't read the first 2 books?
Absolutely. They are sequential, but, I guess when I was an English major at our alma mater at Rochester, I was trained that any piece of literature or film should stand on its own. You don't have to see Rocky before you see Rocky 2. The same with the Harry Potter series, the same with go back to the Tom Hardy, Tom Swift books, or any series, any collection. I think a piece of work should stand on its own. So the toughest thing, frankly, is picking up is writing the second and third book without repeating a lot from the first 1 or 2. But yes, they stand on their own. In brief, the first one is about how the people come together to get this ship, to buy the ship. The second one is about some tales that happen while they're on the ship, and then we'll get to the third one in a minute. But no, you don't need to read the first 2 to get the third. I not at all.
So and that's good. I skipped class that day when that was taught in writing class, but I did kind of figure out in approaching my second of, I call it a series, I call it a trilogy, but like yours, they have to stand on their own. I'm glad that I was mindful of that, even though I missed that class that you took. So talk about your new book, Tides of Betrayal.
The new book is, as you say, it's Tides of Betrayal, Scandal on the Waves. And so you've got these passengers sailing around. There's woman, Eva Lampedusa, who is the protagonist in all of the books.
Yeah. So that, excuse me for interrupting. So I remember that name. She's constant to all 3, right?
Right. She and some of the other directors, some of the other members of the board of directors, but some come in and out. But Eva's there in the third one with her friends, and critical to the success of the ship is its finances. And they've got to sell all the apartments, and the apartments are very, very expensive, 40, 50, $100 million. And if they don't have enough sold, they owe the bank and the shipbuilder a lot of money. And they come up with this idea that the only way they're going to succeed is to get the 5-star review from the most famous review place in the world. And they say, well, what is that? TripAdvisor or Yelp or whatever. And they find this reviewer called Peyton's Place. And the person's name is Peyton Flynn.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to seduce Peyton Flynn to come on the ship. But of course, Peyton Flynn is anonymous. You don't know who Peyton Flynn is. So word comes out that Peyton Flynn is coming on the ship or is on the ship. And the crew and the owners and everybody goes crazy trying to figure out who is Peyton Flynn. And every time a guest makes some outrageous request, I want to have dinner at the Taj Mahal, I want to, go to the Kremlin, they have to accommodate them because it could be Peyton Flynn.
So Peyton Flynn comes on the ship anonymously.
Correct.
Wow. And the ship, by the way, the ship is called the Paradise, right?
Yes, that's it, Paul. Paradise. Yep.
Okay,
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
On the ship, ordinarily on Paradise, you've got a lot of weirdos, people who, I shouldn't say weirdos, people who make weird requests for outrageous stuff. And so when Peyton Flynn comes on and requests are made for outrageous stuff, you don't know if it's passengers who are just normal passengers or if it's this reviewer who they have to kowtow to and give everything, that Peyton Flynn wants. So a lot of people get a lot of really good favors that they don't deserve. But
the word that comes to mind when you talk about the passengers of the Paradise making outrageous requests, which I suspect are somewhat based on the passengers on the world, the word that comes to mind is eccentric. Did you find that some of your guests, some of your co-passengers on the world were eccentric, or is that just kind of a license for the fictional account?
Well, if you're going to say eccentric, meaning you have to have housekeeping come change your sheets 4 times a day, every day of the year, that's eccentric. If you're going to say that they had to have bottled water from a certain country that's thousands of miles away, delivered every day, I'd say that's eccentric. If you told me they would only drink 2 sips or 3 sips of a bottle of wine and then get rid of it, I'd say that's eccentric. If you're going to tell me they had lists of preferences that would go 8 or 10 pages of certain foods they could be served and couldn't be served, that's eccentric. Certain words you would use to refer to them and not refer to them by things like Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor, that's eccentric.
So tell me you're exaggerating. Tell me that's not really some of the requests you had.
I'll tell you anything you want, but that's pretty much the baseline.
Wow. Okay. All right. So continue on with Tides of Betrayal. I'm sorry I interrupted, but the world just sounds so fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's so the person comes on and people start, as is the case in all 3 books, people are having affairs, doing drugs, cheating each other, embezzling, doing all kinds of naughty and nasty and fun things, all while trying to stay out of the orbit of Peyton Flynn to make sure that Peyton Flynn doesn't see any of these bad things. Because if they don't get this 5-star review, they're in a world of hurt. So at the same time that's going on, they're trying to figure out other ways to raise more money, how to sell apartments that may or may not involve a very attractive sales manager who boasts cleavage to anybody who comes on looking to buy apartments. And I don't think I have to tell you where that goes. There's one guy who comes on who was accused of abusing a younger niece whose father beat this guy with a cricket bat, and he tries to hide that when he comes on. There are a lot of kind of naughty people who come on the ship, and so half the fun of the book is weaving your way through them as you try to figure out who's Peyton Flynn.
Where can my listeners get their hands on the Billionaires at Sea books?
Amazon. The first book, Billionaires Paradise, is available in paperback, on Kindle, and Audible. The next 2 books are in paper and Kindle. And of course, I always tell people Kindle doesn't mean you have to have a Kindle. Kindle just means you download the version of it and you can read it on your iPad, your computer, your phone, whatever you want. On
the what? You say the first one's on Audible, right?
Yes.
Did you do the narration yourself?
I did not. That's another great question, Paul. There's a whole world of people who do narration for books, and they have awards like we've heard of, the Emmys and the Grammys and things. There's a set of awards for people, and I forget what they're called. But when my publisher said we were going to have do a narrator, I said, that's great. And they said male or female, and I said probably a female because the book is written in a female's eyes. And then they sent me clips of 7 women, professional readers.
Mm-hmm.
One had a little bit of the one we went with is natively Colombian, so there's a little bit of an accent which is perfectly appropriate and wonderful. And then you had some older women, younger women. It's just fascinating. It's a world that I didn't know existed. I don't know about you or your listeners, but it was fascinating.
Great. Good luck with the new book. Of course, good luck with the entire series. Do you think, I suspect, and I don't know for sure for myself, I released my third book earlier this year, and it's too soon to say if there's been any impact on the first two. Do you think that the book you just released will sort of give a shot in the arm to the first two? I would think so.
It might. I was blessed, Paul. I have to tell you, my second book became a national bestseller last year, the Scandal at Sea book. And I'm just so over the moon about that. I could just from an ego perspective to the thought that I, who was a horrible English student who ended up practicing law and didn't even like to read that much, wrote a national bestseller, just tickles me to death. So, yeah, I hope the third book does really well. I hope it moves, the first two a little bit. I'm really focused on the third book, The Tides of Betrayal. And I think that's a fun book. I think it's very cohesive. I think it's got some flavor, and I think it, as I said, it stands on its feet, and whatever that does, it does. And if it drives the other two, that's fine too. But can't get a lot better than a bestseller.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I mentioned how much I appreciate you coming on in the midst of a launch. If I didn't say that, I meant to. Do you have anything special? I mean, it's only been out a few days. Do you have anything special planned for the launch?
We have a new website, which we started right before the launch, and it's peterantonuccibooks.com. And we have a Facebook page called Billionaires at Sea. And we have Instagram called Peter Antonucci Books. So, and if people log on to the website and put in their email address or whatever, we'll keep them up to date with newsletters. And we're going to do some offerings. We're going to do some fun things, some giveaways, more than books, probably sunglasses and some neat things. We haven't figured all that out yet, but we've done that in the past. And so we're excited about the entirety of the campaign, and especially, hopefully, the success of the book and the Peter Antonucci Books website.
Let's talk specifically about the World. Now, are you still affiliated with the World?
I'm not. I sold my last apartment right before the COVID pandemic, and I'm very glad about that.
Yeah, that must have been a tough time for the vessel during the pandemic. What did they do?
They did what's called they didn't go to dry. They just cruised around with no passengers, and the ship usually carries a crew of about 278, and I think they downsized to a crew of about 100, maybe 80. But just to power a vessel and move it around, you need the full bridge complement, right? Your captain, all your other people on the bridge. You need your housekeeping crew to take care of everybody. You need the food and beverage is scaled back. You don't need a sommelier. You don't need, but you've got to have your executive chef, your sous chefs, your pastry chefs, your blah 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 blah, your engineers. You can't move that ship without at least 70, 80 people on it.
So during the pandemic, correct me if I'm wrong, there were no passengers on board, right? It was just
there were no passengers on the ship. That's correct.
Did any of them, what's the right word, fight to stay on? I mean, I would think some people sold their homes when they bought into the World and had no place. I mean, all of these people had places to go, but would have a preference to stay put. Did any of them try to do that?
They might have wanted to. The ship had some very good captains and a very good board of directors. And when they said no, the answer was no. There was no real. You can whine and cry all you want about anything, but there were rules on the ship, and they were well enforced. And the same as if we all think back a few years to what was going on in America or any other country that we may be in. there were rules, and
Mhm.
if they said you couldn't do this, I mean, look at it in Italy. If you went on the street, they had soldiers on the streets. I mean, we live in a
Okay.
different world now where it doesn't seem so confined, but yeah, back then the ship said no, and the answer was no.
Okay. Okay. And plus, I would think people of this caliber would have homes all over the world.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how did you learn about the world? It sounds like you are a star litigator. And by the way, Peter hasn't said it, listeners, but I'm saying it. If we still had dictionaries and you looked up litigator in the dictionary, you'd probably see Peter's picture. He was a major fixture in New York during that time.
That's kind of you.
Say something about your transition from law to the world. Had you been thinking about the world? Did somebody approach you? How did it enter your orbit?
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal years and years before, and the thought was, well, I'm going to get on this ship, and I've been thinking about it. It seems so weird. I'm going to get on and just get it out of my system, and it's like a new restaurant opens in town. You want to try it. Everybody says it's expensive. It's great. You don't want to like it, but you go there to try it. And that's what it was. I flew down to Panama and got on there and went through the Panama Canal and spent probably 10 days on the ship at that point as a prospective resident.
So they allow prospective residents to take a cruise.
Yeah. You have. I mean, some people, very few people, would buy an apartment on the ship for millions or tens of millions of dollars without seeing it first. You don't usually buy a house for that money without seeing it first. So yeah, you're allowed to go on the ship and you spend, I don't know what it's 7, 10, 15 days, whatever it is. It's kind of kick the tires and see if it feels good.
I know this is a real detailed question, but I'm just curious. So in that first cruise, that 10-day cruise to the Panama Canal, I don't assume that was gratis. You had to pay something, right?
Oh yeah.
So what do you do?
Yeah.
Pay like a refundable down payment, maybe?
No, there's nothing refundable about it. No. There's no refundable no matter what.
Oh, okay,
No.
okay.
No, I think I don't remember the exact amount, whether it's 5,000 or 7,000 a night, but you pay for as long as you're on board, and if you don't like it, then you paid your money and you had a nice cruise. If you like it, then you pay more money.
Okay. Yeah, that didn't come out right. I didn't mean refundable if you don't buy. I meant if you do buy, it goes as part of your down payment. But you just cleared that up. No.
No.
Okay. So you went on that 10-day cruise and you decided midway through you want to do this?
I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard.
Really?
I thought the apartments were overpriced. I thought it was elitist. And I thought you had to pay too much money in maintenance. I thought all that for the first 2 hours. Then I went to the residential office and I said, "What do you have for sale? I want to go on." And then I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen.
So, and again, this is real detailed, but this is fascinating. Sure. Talk about your first meal on board. Did they get you with that meal? How did after a few hours, how did they put the hooks in you?
Paul, I'm an old man, and my first meal, 10 years ago. I don't know. I couldn't even. I'm having a tough time thinking of what I had this morning.
Well, what was it? What was it that told you, "Ooh, I want to do this"? I'm sure you remember that.
The exclusive nature of it. When I walked on, every crew member knew my name and knew within days, and they sit down with you and ask you what your preferences are. When you sit down to lunch, what do you like? We don't want to ask you what you want to drink. What can we put in front of you? And for example, I ended up over the years, and I had, your preference. There was a certain type of iced tea they made. And of course, everything was brewed in-house. Certain type of iced tea in a certain shaped glass from Germany. It was not a regular glass. It was some kind of a modified beer stein with 3 ice cubes. And any time I went to a restaurant, that was put down in front of me the moment I sat down. It's that kind of attention to detail that made it so spectacular.
Wow.
And the crew, I cannot say enough about the crew. It's the most amazing crew. They love what they do. Most of them, especially the senior level, have been on the ship for years, some since the ship launched 20 years ago. I just can't say enough. They're just incredible people. It's truly a family.
Did you interact much or at all with other passengers on that first cruise?
Yeah, because I mean, I don't want to say I was target, but when new people come on as prospective residents, the owners get an email blast in advance saying so and so is coming on, and a little bit of detail. They're from New York or Ohio or wherever, California. This is what they did for a living. This is if they're married, if they have kids, a little bit of background. And kind of stop by and say hello if you see them, and that's the way it is. It's kind of like a country club in that way that you want to make people feel welcome.
But by the way, you were talking about folks from different parts of the U.S. What was the split between U.S. citizens or U.S. residents and people from outside the U.S.?
We always had less than 49% U.S. citizens.
Oh, really? Take our listeners, and I know this is difficult without video, but take our listeners on a brief virtual tour of the world.
Okay. It's funny. A lot of the small things, a lot of things are smaller versions of what you would see on a cruise ship. Like if you close your eyes and envision what the elevators look like on a cruise ship, if you get on the world, it's just a smaller elevator. It's the same kind of decor.
Right.
But when you walk into the world, you're walking into what I would call the main floor, which I guess is deck 5. There's a big lobby in front of you with a large, and this is fresh in my mind because I was just on the ship about 2 or 3 weeks ago. The ship was in the U.S. For the first time in years, first time in 6 years, and I was on it here. So there's a big lobby, big wooden panel lobby. There's a lobby bar to the right of it. To the left, there's 3 or 4 concierge desks. If you go down what's called the street, the main hallway, there's a little nightclub. Well, there's towards the bow, there's a little nightclub area. There's a theater called Coliseum where they do lectures and performances and things like that. Then you go up to the front and you've got an art gallery. You've got a chapel. You've got the hair and beauty salon, the spa, the gym, all that stuff. But if you
how was it? How big was the spa? I would think for these type of passengers, that was sort of a key venue.
Oh, it was a key venue. I mean, there were women who would go, I'm not going to say every day and get their hair blown out, but I'd say 5 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah. And some who didn't go more than once a month or whatever it was. But, of course, on big days, holidays, or when we were going into big cities, Venice, Hong Kong, Singapore, you had to make your spa appointment weeks, if not months in advance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, keep going. I interrupted.
So if you're at the plaza, instead of going towards the bow, if you go to the stern, there's, again, down this main walk called the street, there's a shop called the boutique. There's a fancy restaurant, a fancy shop across from the boutique, which, and I don't know what it was called, but it was high-end jewelry and, the kind of stuff. If your wife forgot to bring her $300,000 bracelet, you could just pick one up, charge to your account. And there was a little cafe, it's called a deli called Freddy's, and that was interesting. They're fresh, you get your own vegetables and food there. And there was a formal restaurant called Portraits, which was spectacular. And if it were on land, I think it would have been Michelin starred. But one of the criterion for a Michelin star is you have to be open to the public.
Right.
Other than that, it makes every criteria. Then you go back to the stern, and there's a restaurant called Marina. And then when you're at the stern, and when the ship is anchored in, maybe the Caribbean, maybe Africa, or somewhere where the laws are more gentle than the U.S. And the water's gentle, they drop the stern. It unfolds with a couple of chains, and it goes flat to the water. And during the day, from that platform, we have sailboats, water bikes, kayaks, stuff like that. And at night, they set up the restaurant. They set up tables out there, probably 8 or 10 tables, and you can sit there. And I've had many meals sitting on a flat stern watching the dolphins, jump around us because of the lights.
Now, talk about your apartment, or I should say apartments, because at one point you had 4.
I did. I think I don't know if I was a record holder or if I was just dumb, but I did have 4. I didn't have 4 at once. Thankfully, that would have been a hell of a maintenance bill. I did have 2 at once, 2 big apartments at once for almost a year, because we were unable to sell one. We just tried everything, but couldn't get any buyers for, I want to say it was 8 months. That was a little financially painful. But I had apartments that were studios, 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom. The 2 bedroom is the way to go. And of course, there are apartments that are bigger, that are 3 or 4 bedrooms.
So take us through your apartment.
So you would walk in, and there was a hallway to go in. You turn to the right, and there was a kitchen. In the kitchen, we had our washer and dryer. It was just like a kitchen you have in an apartment in anywhere. You have your microwave. You had your floor to ceiling refrigerator. We had a wine cooler, whatever, wine floor to ceiling wine cooler. Your counters, your cabinets for all your stuff. You didn't have any cleaning supplies because housekeeping came as often as you wanted. Usually they came twice a day, but as I said, if you were eccentric enough to need them 4 or 5 times a day, you got it. Then you would walk either through that hallway or through the kitchen, and you'd get into the dining room, and it was a big table with, depends on the size of your apartment. I think I had 6 chairs around the dining table. Then you go to the living room, and that's, of course, faces the water. You've got your long balcony that goes all along the living room into the bedroom. And then you would walk from the living room to the bedroom. The bedroom would be on your left. In the case of my apartment, on the left. And there was a bathroom, an ensuite bathroom.
Talk about that kitchen. Why would you have? Well, I shouldn't ask it that way. It's interesting. There's a kitchen, but there's world-class food and chefs on the ship. Did you ever cook, or did you always eat in a restaurant?
Absolutely cooked. Some people cooked a lot. If you were tired and of course there was room service called in-residence dining. If you were tired and you didn't want to go downstairs in the morning to one of the restaurants, or at night, if you came back from a tour, you could either order in or cook. If you're somebody who's into healthy cooking, sometimes you just wanted to cook for yourself. You'd go down to Freddy's and grab vegetables and things like that. But the fun thing is when we went to ports that had, obviously most ports have great seafood. And if you saw great stuff in the market, you would buy it and come home and cook it the same way you would at home. If you wanted to use garlic and onions and whatever you wanted, you could do it, and you would do whatever you want. So it was fun cooking the apartment. What was really fun is you just cooked. You would call downstairs, they send you the pots, you cooked, and then you'd call downstairs and they'd come clean it all up and take it away.
I read somewhere in my research, I guess I read it, just on the site, or some site regarding the world. In some cases, won't the chef come to your kitchen and cook for you?
Yes, you can. It's called hire a chef, and you have the chef come to your apartment. One of the chefs. There's a lot of chefs on the ship. I couldn't guess how many. And yeah, they'll cook for you. What is fascinating, you have to appreciate you're always at sea, and at sea, the greatest danger, as anyone could tell you, is fire. And we had in our kitchen, if the smoke detector went off, these massive steel doors came down and sealed you in. It was like being in a bank vault. And that was it. And of course, security would come up immediately and check it out and open it. And, it was contained. But boy, oh boy, there were a couple of times where we accidentally, set off the smoke detector, didn't think it was that bad. And boom, boom, boom. It's, oh, wow.
Wow. So are you still friendly with the people you sailed with on the world?
I am. I'm friendly with a great deal of, I have to say, Paul, I compare it to my time in Rochester when I was in a fraternity. I really do compare it. 10% of the people in the fraternity, 10, 15% were some of my greatest friends and will be friends for life. And I always look forward to seeing them.
Excuse me, are they still owners?
Yeah, some are. A lot of people who are not owners, and we still, get together every month for dinner. Then there's about 80% of the people who are nice friends. You have dinner with them, you go play around a golf, you go on a tour, and you're all friendly. And there was about 10% that you just didn't want to be around. It's just human nature. When you've got 130 people, unless you're a real, whatever, you can't be best friends with everybody. Nor did I want to be. And nor did anybody want to be. So it was a good group. We all got along. We got along very well.
Peter, and one other question about the people you sailed with on the world. Obviously, I don't expect you to name names. Who is the most, what's the right word, Googleable or Instagrammable or whatever? Who's the most notable resident, without naming them, that you ever encountered?
I'm not naming, and it's tough to do without naming, but we did have at least one person who was referred to as Your Excellency.
Oh, wow.
we had one person who is, and I don't want to give it away, but one of the top 3 paid television personalities of all times.
Wow.
We had former government people from various governments around the world. A lot of, you would know a good deal of them. You would not know most of them.
Okay. Well, Peter, before we let you go, we usually, at this point in the show, post a few fun a few fun cruise questions. But given that you are our first guest with experience on the world, I want to do all of the, what I call fun or light or even frivolous questions. I just can't get enough of the world. So I want to do them all world-related questions, sort of rapid fire style. And forgive me on some of these questions. I've polled my listeners, and these are things they want to hear. And all my listeners are saying, no, he didn't. Let's see. Ever see any pirates?
West coast of Africa, but much more on the east coast of Africa.
Get out. Tell me more.
We took, when we left certain countries, you're limited to how many guns you can carry on the ship and what caliber and stuff like that. But when we left certain countries, we would have a team of mercenaries, I call them mercenaries, a team of soldiers meet us. I don't know how many miles offshore it was. And they would come on and sail with us for X amount of weeks when we were in very dangerous parts of the world, the Suez Canal, or where the Houthi rebels have been very active in the last few weeks, blowing up things. When we would sail through there, we had these people with these weapons, which were more than just firearms. They were greater than that. Let's put it that way.
I've been meaning to ask. You sent me some great photos, which the listeners have seen in the last couple of weeks as I promoted your episode. At least one of the photos looked to me like a well-equipped commando. So was he one of those people you picked up, or was he someone who traveled with the ship all the time?
No, I saw that picture. He's somebody who came on board from time to time. He and his team, snipers, sharpshooters. Yep. For obvious security reasons, I'm happy to tell you this, but I can't tell you where we did that because the ship does still travel to those areas. And two things I'm not going to do is risk anybody's security, or as I said in answer to previous question, is any personally identifying information about anybody. But other than that, go for it. Fair game.
So speaking of security, I assume residents couldn't have weapons. So who enforces rules? What's the security staff like on the World?
Excellent. Very good security staff. The head of security has been with the ship. I don't know if he's been there since it launched but a long time. He's a British guy, and you believe me, you don't want to mess with him. But he's a great human being.
Mm-hmm.
The whole team is really, really good. They know the rules. The tough thing is, if you're sailing to so many different countries, and different countries have different rules about what you can bring and what you can't bring. And these are not the days of Captain Phillips where you could not have firearms on board and you had to use hoses.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say that is no longer the case.
Mm-hmm. Any major? What was the medical facilities like? Any major medical issues or medical evacuations, even deaths on board?
Sadly, the answer is yes to that. It was there was a great medical facility. We had great technology down there. I think we even had X-ray machines. We had even the eye machines that you see in an ophthalmologist's office. We had nurses and doctors, and at least one doctor at all time, unless we went on expedition, and then we would have another doctor or medics when we went to places like Antarctica or places into the jungle where you would anticipate people getting dengue fever or malaria or worse. But the medical facilities were really, really good. We did have we had a heliport on the bow. It was used for evacuations if needed. We were very blessed that there were several times I can recall where people had heart attacks, and we were in one situation weeks away from land. We were in Antarctica.
Wow.
And the doctor, we were past the point of go, no go, of going back to New Zealand, and the docs did a great job. I mean, and the person survived and is fine, and it's all happy endings. Really, really good stuff. I mean, yeah, you have an aging population, you're going to have some deaths, and that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
There was one murder we saw that was not on the ship, but on the dock. It was I can't even tell you what country it was, but somebody. The rumor was it was a drug deal gone bad, and somebody dove into the water, and another guy just stood there and assumed the position with his Glock and fired the whole round.
Oh my goodness!
Into the water and killed the guy. So look, you go to enough places, you see enough things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, forgive me for this question, but again, these are the supposedly the fun cruise questions. So I'm going to be nosy here. Spicy stories, resident to resident, resident to crew, crew to crew. What can you say?
Yes to yes, yes to yes, yes to yes. There were a lot. I mean, and there's a lot of that in my books too. There's a lot of affairs, and it wasn't always sordid stuff. But yeah, there were, and again, there were some happy endings where crew members hooked up and ended up getting married, and I'm in touch with many of them who now have children and they're living happy terrestrial life. There were residents who hooked up with crew members, and I can think of some who left their wives on the ship to run off with crew members. That wasn't always the most tasteful thing for everybody to swallow. And there were affairs between residents that were everybody kind of pretended they didn't know about, but they were pretty damn obvious.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
People sneaking through back stairways and doing different things and in places where they really never should have been.
This question brings up a thought. We haven't talked about the age distribution on the ship. Were there any people on the ship younger than 50?
Yes. Yeah. I'm thinking of one or two couples who were in their 40s. That was the fun part of it, that when we did go to places and took long hikes or got, we would get a helicopter for the day and go to the top of some mountain and hike down. And it was really rugged stuff. That we did have a good, indefatigable group of fearless troopers, usually somewhere between 8 and 16, 20 people who would game for anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that was good. And yeah, the age did go into the mid 90s.
So when you got on at 52, you probably were among the youngest ones on.
Yes, absolutely.
Here's a more serious one. What's the most unforgettable? And I think I know the answer, but I'll let you tell it. What's the most unforgettable place ever visited?
If I said anything other than Antarctica, I would have to be lying. Antarctica is a very, very special place. I've been there many times. I've gone down through from Ushuaia in the southernmost part of Argentina. Through the Drake Passage. I've gone there from New Zealand. I've gone through the Weddell Sea, the Ross Ice Shelf. That's where we set a Guinness World Record for being the southernmost vessel in the history of the planet. And been from Antarctica to Australia. So I've seen. I won't say I've seen a lot of Antarctica. Antarctica is massive, but I've been there many times and seen it, and it's just glorious, just glorious. So that's, I'd say, the best, the most unforgettable. Going to what I call uncivilized places in Borneo and the Solomon Islands, or one of my favorite places there was a place called Tikopia, where we saw they have javelin fights, and whoever loses eats the other person's waist. I mean, really primitive. They had never seen cell phones. They had never seen, the little kids had never seen ice. We put ice in kids' hands, and they were giggling. And the smiles we saw were amazing. And when we went to these, I'm calling them uncivilized islands, we would bring soccer balls or crayons or things like that and give to the kids, and they loved it. But safaris were great. Sometimes we would get off the ship and then just hire a plane and go somewhere else in the country. Like the Taj Mahal is not, you don't go to port in Agra in India. So we would jump off somewhere else in India, get a plane and jet up there and do that. Same thing when we would go through went down to the Panama Canal a few times, and we jumped off and took a plane to the Galapagos. And did stuff like that.
Wow. I tell you, as you talk about certainly Antarctica and Galapagos, I think I'll pass on Borneo, or places where they had to eat waste. But all of those places are on my bucket list, and it's old hat to you. Finally, Peter, you probably kind of answered it already, but I asked you the most unforgettable place. What was the single most exciting experience you ever had during your time aboard the World?
Oh boy, I had so many great experiences. I can't tell you. One of my favorites, and boy, people are going to be angry. My friends are going to be angry for not including them. One of them that definitely comes to mind is one of the last weeks I was there. We hosted a party for the launch of my new book, and it was in the formal restaurant, and it was all our good friends, and it was a wonderful, because it was kind of a send off, and the crew made it terrific, and it was just a very, very special night. But one of the other things that was huge was New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve, we always went somewhere great. It was either Sydney, in Australia, we would go to Cape Town, New York, Venice, Hong Kong, someplace spectacular. And we always got the best berth right in the middle of the harbor under fireworks. And those were magical nights.
I tell you, Peter, I could just talk to you for hours about the world. But you have another part of your life, and I hope Tides of Betrayal is the best book yet. So all the best to you on that. And once again, thank you for coming on in the midst of a launch. I had another best-selling author doing the same thing, and I actually thought about her when you mentioned the ship medical facility. She's on in a couple of weeks after you, called I think it's called "I Was a Cruise Ship Doctor." So
I saw your post about
that.
Yeah.
So I thought about her when you were talking about the world's Sounds like fine medical facilities. Well, listen, Peter, thank you so much for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. Are you going to be doing any cruising anytime soon?
I don't know. I do whatever my wife tells me to. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing tonight or tomorrow but I do anticipate, I do want to get back on the water. And I do enjoy going to neat places and meeting people. So I think it will occur sometime in the next year or two.
Well, tell your wife that this is the offer I made. You go on your first conventional cruise since the world, and we're going to have you back on the show to give us a trip report and talk about some questions. Because I said I could just spend another couple of hours asking you questions. So you've got an open invitation to come back, but we got to keep our listeners up to date on cruises and all that. So come back after you do that cruise. I know it's going to be a nice one.
Thank you. And I will be posting things on my website, as I said, peterantonuccibooks.com, if people want to check that out. And if I do, when I go on cruises, I'll put it there too.
All right, Peter. As they say, I'll see you on the ocean.
All right, Paul. Thank you very much. Fair winds and following seas, my friend.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again for $18.99, can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.